Today we're talking all about horizontal, vertical, and diagonal movement within the pentatonic scale to create more interesting ideas for our lead playing. Stick with me. All right, so last lesson we discussed the 5 patterns that we could use with the pentatonic scales to cover the entire fretboard on the guitar. If you haven't watched that video, I'd suggest you go back to see that and see what we talked about. We essentially broke the pentatonic scale down into 5 individual patterns in the same key, in the key of A minor is what we were using, that was going to allow us to be able to cover the entire fretboard so that we could basically in our solos utilize every note across our fretboard. Now, the problem with that is that we practice these scales in such a manner, right, where we just kind of go straight up and down the strings, and we get very used to that very quickly. Now, there's nothing, inherently wrong with that, but the more we do that, the more we're going to kind of cement in our head that this is the way we play these notes, right? And when we go to play guitar solos with them, we're going to tend to follow what we know, right? And we'll have some very linear movements, just moving straight up and down the scale possibly. And we want to kind of break outside of that now. Take the pentatonic scale and turn it into something that's going to look and sound quite different to what people are used to hearing when players utilize that scale. So I've come up with 3 ways we're going to talk about breaking outside of sort of the normal use of what we're used to seeing people use a pentatonic scale for. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to talk about different types of movement on the guitar. Okay, we're going to talk about horizontal movement, vertical movement, and diagonal movement within our scales. And this is something that can apply beyond the pentatonic scale as well when we get into adding other notes and whatnot. But these are more concepts that we're going to be able to apply to many areas in our playing. But for now, we're going to apply them to what we've been talking about, which is the pentatonic scale. So let me first tell you what I mean by horizontal, vertical, and diagonal movement. Well, I would describe the way we were playing last time as vertical movement. I see my hand is moving vertically across the guitar fretboard, okay? That's the way we oftentimes practice these scales. Right, vertical movement. I see horizontal movement as moving this way across the guitar fretboard. And so on and so forth, okay? And I see diagonal movement would be moving the horizontal movement and the vertical combined, so we get kind of this diagonal movement going across the fretboard this way, or possibly this way, making an X shape if we did both of them, okay? So you might say, well, what are you talking about? How can we utilize this with our pentatonic scales? Well, we're going to jump right into talking about horizontal playing, because last time, basically, we would have covered a little bit of the vertical playing, but we will talk about some new concepts with that too today. With horizontal playing, we can unlock a lot of potential in our pentatonic patterns in a new way that I haven't seen really taught in a lot of places. And I think this is one of the most powerful tools we can use, especially with our pentatonic scales. We talked last time about there being 5 pentatonic patterns. And with those 5 patterns, we could move across the entire fretboard. Now, I numbered those patterns with different combinations of, if you remember, first finger, fourth finger, and first finger, third finger, right? For instance, our main root pattern I said was 1, 4, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 4. It's pretty simple to remember. What if we now said there's actually 6 more patterns that a lot of people don't think about for the pentatonic scale? You might right away say, well, wait a sec. I thought we said that with the 5 patterns we learned last time that we were able to cover the whole guitar fretboard. And that's true, we were. That was moving the vertical motion that I'm talking about. What if we talk about horizontal? We have 6 strings on the guitar, therefore the potential for 6 more patterns if we think about learning those patterns across the string this way. So we just stay on one string. So let's say the 6th string is going to have its own pentatonic pattern. The 5th string is going to have its own pentatonic pattern. 4th string, 3rd string, 2nd string, 1st string, all the way up. We can have 6 new patterns. Why is it that everybody gets stuck in this idea of playing up and down scale patterns solely like this? I think it's every bit as important to know them moving horizontally as well. So let's take a look at these 6 patterns. Well, if we go back and think about the 5 patterns moving vertically we talked about last time, if we go to the sixth string, we see that the root pattern was here. That would be 1-4 on that string. We then had a pattern before that that had started with 1-3 from the third fret, right? So 1-3. What if we just combine those two? 1-3 here, shift up to our fifth position, go 1-4, move to our next position, next one, and keep moving all the way up. Why don't we treat that as its own pattern? So what we would have is this. There's our pentatonic scale, solely across the sixth string. Well, we can learn if we can learn each one of those patterns, as well as we know the so-called vertical patterns that we learned last time, this is going to give us the ability to be able to move effortlessly horizontally across the guitar and vertically across the guitar, and combine these patterns in ways maybe we would not have thought of before. So let's examine these then for each string. So we just did the sixth one, let's recap. So that would be like starting on the third fret here in the key of A minor again. All of these are in the key of A minor. We're just going to stick with that for now. In a future lesson, we'll talk about moving from key to key with these, okay? But I think it's important to stick with one key for now, really internalize these patterns in that key, and then I think you'll find when you know them that well, when you try to switch keys with them, it's going to be a much easier task, okay? So we will get to that. So this one again, sixth string starting on the third fret. It's going to be a 1-3. We then move to the fifth fret, 1-4, move to the eighth fret, 1-3, move to the 10th fret, 1-3, move to the 12th fret, 1-4, and then basically the pattern's going to start over again at the 15th fret like we discussed last time with our octave pattern. 1-3, 1-4, 1-3. So that looks like this. Now you may notice as I'm playing that I'm repeating a note, right? I'm playing the A here and then I'm playing it again, but that's fine. We're not doing this to be musical at this moment. We're just trying to map the fingerboard out. Okay, so there it is on the sixth string. Let's move to the fifth string. What you could start to do is visualize how these go together based off the patterns we did last time. What we would have here is 1-3, 1-3, 1-4, 1-3, 1-4, 1-3, 1-3, 1-4. And again, I'll have the graphics up on the screen as you can tell as I'm playing these, you'll be able to see them. So again, there's our pattern for the fifth string. Let's go to the fourth string. Third string. Second string. And the first string, which will be identical to the sixth string. So when I actually said that this was six patterns, it is six patterns, but it's only 5 new patterns, right? Because the sixth string and the first string will be identical. They'll still be D-shaped. Whatever we do on one, we can always do on the other, like we discussed in our first video, because they're 2 octaves apart. So now we have 5 or 6 new patterns, depending on how you want to think about it, moving horizontally. All right, so what does this allow us to do? Well, this really opens the doors now to a very important aspect of playing pentatonic scales. If we simply just learn our vertical patterns, we'll be stuck in each pattern unless we have the ability to move horizontally between them. Right, we've got to be able to move that way as well. So by mastering these patterns horizontally, it's going to give us effortless ability to be able to move between the patterns, the vertical patterns we learned last time, right? So there's various ways we can practice this. can mess around with them in whatever way we want, moving horizontally. Okay, so again, we want to take our time learning those patterns really, really well and internalizing them, getting them to the point where we can play subconsciously with them, okay? I'm not going to sit here and come up with a million exercises for you. It's more just about memorizing them. But one thing we can do that I think is really important with them is use them musically very quickly, right? We can sit there and do... That's going to get boring pretty quick, although we may have to do that, in front of the TV. Just sit there and do that until it's internalized and we know it. But one thing I mentioned in the last lesson was setting up a looper with a chord that works underneath all of these patterns that we're in. Again, we're in the key of A minor, so something with an A minor and a C major, an A minor and D minor, something in that key. We could even just go to YouTube. We live in this great age of being able to, Google something and say backing track in the key of A minor, right? And boom, there it is. Somebody's going to have put together probably a full rhythm section playing something that's pretty inspiring to play over top of, right? So we could do that or just set up a looper. I set up a looper today just for some examples as to how we can do this. But here's one exercise I would encourage everybody to do with these horizontal patterns. And I'll just pick a string. Let's go on our, our third string, let's say. Set up a looper, get a backing track in the proper key, and then just try to improvise with one string, right? Eliminate everything else and get super comfortable with just that one string. It's going to force us to play very different, but that's a good thing. Get out of our comfort zone, right? It's going to force us to maybe do things with the notes to keep them interesting that we wouldn't have maybe thought of before. But it's really going to break us out of thinking vertically and back into this horizontal idea, okay? And I'll give you an example of that right now. Let's examine with our third string, let's say, okay? So here's a little loop I've set up in advance so you didn't have to watch me create some ridiculous little chord progression. This is just going back and forth between the chords A minor and D minor. Works fine. It's going to have a particular sound, but it just gives us an idea of how these notes are going to work over some chords, and also a rhythmic feel for us to work with as well. So here's our loop. I'll start it off, and then I'm just going to explore using nothing but the third string horizontally. I will never leave that string, okay? Or if that's the idea anyways. Let's see what happens, all right? So here's our loop. So all I did there is I forced myself to just stick on the third string, right? We can then say, okay, I feel comfortable with that. Let's go on to the second string. Okay, we might noodle around that for a while. Then we could even start getting into combinations of strings, right? Now, before we do that, what we could do is practice a little bit doing combinations of two strings to get used to this. So let me give an example of that. What we had first with our horizontal movement was something like this. What if we combine now these two strings? Right? The next two strings. and so on and so forth. So once we're done maybe soloing around one individual string, we can do solos around combinations of strings. Maybe I'm going to use now, instead of just my third string, I'm going to use my fourth and third string. I'll give you an example of how that might sound with just using our third and fourth strings. So I think you can see how we can expand this into some pretty interesting stuff, and maybe ideas we would not have thought of doing before, and really forcing ourselves into using a lot of horizontal movement. All right, let's move on then. So that's the idea of horizontal movement, and you could take that as far as you want. Maybe you want to combine three strings, yeah? Whatever. Okay, that's up to you. I don't want this video to go on for 4 hours with me, kind of going through every possible permutation of these ideas. It's not important, because it's going to be better if you can come up with your own ideas. I'm giving you a concept to work with, and then it's good to become creative with that yourself and come up with your own ideas based off of it. And hopefully you'll come up with something I've never thought of. And please share it with me. If you do, that would be wonderful. So let's go back now and talk a little bit about the vertical movement again, and how we can mix that up into something that's a little more interesting. So one concept I came up with that's really interesting, if we go back to our normal vertical pattern, let's go back to our root pattern, let's say here. Everybody knows that pattern, right? That's the typical root pattern. Like I numbered it last time, 1 4 1 3 1 3 1 3 1 4 1 4, or backwards, 4 1 4 1 3 1 3 1 3 1 4 1. Fine. The problem with that is we get playing very linear. Right. One of the most important things one of the most important ways I like to think about soloing a lot of times is not what notes I'm going to play, but what notes I'm not going to play in the scale, what notes I'm going to leave out of the scale. So there's kind of a pattern I came up with for students to use I just nicknamed it or referred to it as a Zig Zag Pattern, for lack of a better term, and I think you'll see why in a second. And what that basically was just omitting certain notes, playing one note per string out of the scale pattern rather than the normal 2 notes per string in a zigzag fashion. So I'll give you an example. What that means is, if we go to our root pattern, if we started with our index finger on the A, instead of going to the next note on that string, or the string right below it on the same fingered note, I would go to sort of the opposing zigzag motion. So that would be to this note, and then zag back to this note, zig up to this note, zag back to this. Okay. Again, you'll see the graphic kind of right up here somewhere, I believe it'll be. So here's that pattern. So it still comes back to our 1 4 and our 1 3 idea. 1 3 1 3 1 4. Except we're now jumping across strings, all with downstrokes in this case. I'm going down, 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 down. Okay, coming back up, 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 up. So that's kind of a neat little pattern, still from the pentatonic, but it really doesn't look anything like a pentatonic scale, although we can see where it comes from within that scale, right? If we kind of do the reverse of it. So in each pattern we know of our 5 vertical patterns, we're going to have 2 patterns like these little zigzag movements. Okay, so one starting on the index finger, which I did, 1 3 1 3 1 4. 4 1 3 1 3 1, however you want to think of that. What if we started with our pinky though on the 8th fret and stayed in this pattern? We'd have 4 1 3 1 4 1. Pretty interesting stuff, and we're going to come back and talk about how we can use that in just a minute. But let's go through all the patterns. So we'd have one back here in that pattern at our second position. Second sort of / third position. That would be this. So 1 3 1 4 1 3 3 1 4 1 3 1, or starting off this finger, 3, 1, 4, 1. Okay, and that would be the one to go along with this pattern that we learned last time. Okay, pretty interesting stuff. We already talked about the root pattern. Just to recap, it would be this pattern, and it would be these patterns. For the zigzag pattern. We then move up to the third pattern we learned. And again, we can go 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. The neat thing about this is it doesn't sound pentatonic. We're really widening our intervals out to be much more musical, okay? If we started that pattern right here, it would be, or with the proper fingers, I can go 4, 1, 4, 1, 3, 1. So we have, it should be 1, 3, sorry, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, or 4, 1, 4, 1, 3, 1. And again, these graphics will be up on the screen. If you can't really tell what I'm doing there, it'll be easier to follow along. So based off the next pattern now, which was this, right? We would have a pattern here that goes like little power chord shapes all the way up almost, right? 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. And the next one starting here, we would basically have this. We would have 3, 1, 3, 1 shifted back, and then 4, 1. Okay, so again, now we come to our fifth pattern, and we would have this shape. 1, 4, 1, 3, 1, 3. Or starting with our pinky, we would have 4, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, if depending on how you want to finger that, because when we did our other pattern, we moved up here with our third. But again, we could go 4, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, or 4, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1. The fingering is more just for memory work right now. We can really decide on what's most comfortable to play once we have it memorized, right? So think of all the patterns now that we have here. A lot of interesting little ideas to think of our pentatonic scale in a very different angle and get our head in a different way of looking at them, visualizing them, so we're going to be able to access them in different ways. The beauty of these patterns is we almost come up with little chord shapes within them, okay? And what you'll notice, if I just sort of lump a few strings together, let's take strings 2, 3, and 4, and go to these patterns, and it'll come back to this shape here. There's a little zigzag pattern, right? Which creates a chord. Well, in the same, we have those ones, right? We're going to start visualizing little chord shapes, which can then be used for licks. That don't really look pentatonic anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my loop again, and I'll try to superimpose some of those ideas, and which may be seemingly unrelated little chord shapes over top of the A minor and the D minor of our loop. Okay, so let's try that out. So you can see there's some really nice ideas there, and I hope you could kind of see how I was using these kind of little zigzaggy type of patterns that we had created in the last example. Okay, so that's an idea of how we can change up the vertical playing to be more than just, you know, this linear straight up and down scale playing. Okay, so we talked about horizontal, we've talked about vertical playing and how we can change that up a little bit. Now let's talk about diagonal playing. And you go, well, how are we going to mess around with that? Now, some of these ideas might not seem quite as musical to you, but a lot of this is just to get us mentally to break outside of what we're used to. Do something different than what we're used to, and that's where it's all at. And you can find a way to musically incorporate these in a way that's going to be pleasing to the listener, right? Here's what I mean by this. So we'll start again in our pattern, our first pattern that we had talked about last time. Well, the one before the root pattern. What if we decided, well, let's do this zigzag kind of movement again, but instead of just going with individual notes, let's actually utilize 2 complete notes from the next pattern. Okay, we can go, all right. You know, get used to just going back and forth with that. Well, we've got some other ideas we can use now. We can go diagonally this way and diagonally back this way. So we could combine these 2 patterns, the root pattern and the pattern before it, to do something like this, where I'm still using my little 1-3s and 1-4 shapes, but I'm bouncing back and forth, zigzagging between different patterns altogether. 1-3, 1-3, 1-4, 1-3, 1-3, 1-4. Kind of do the reverse going back. So that's an interesting little pattern, but we can take that a step further and say, okay, well, we could actually just expand that all the way up the fretboard. So a fast way for us to get from here maybe up to here in a way that's not going to be so scale-like. So what we can do is we can start in our first pattern here and then diagonally move throughout all of the patterns all the way up the fretboard, right? So starting here, we could go with our 1-3, move diagonally to our next pattern, 1-3, diagonally to our next pattern, 1-4, diagonally to our next pattern, 1-4, diagonally to our next pattern, 1-3, and then diagonally to our next pattern, right? So that gives us a fast way of being able to move over the whole fretboard in a way that's very unpentatonic-like, even though we've done nothing other than utilize the pentatonic scale in another way, right? So again, right? So we can do that from any starting point, right? If I was here on my root pattern, I could go 1-4 here, 1-4 here, right? That would jump up to 1-3 here. And we can take it very slowly and just work over a couple strings at a time if you want to get a feel for just the first 2. Actually turns into a little A minor 7th arpeggio without us even really trying to, right? We extend that out again. Work on that until it's comfortable and work our way all the way up, right? Until we're comfortable with that. So you see, there's all sorts of neat ideas that maybe we wouldn't have thought of doing before that are going to be kind of musical in a new way. And it gets us to just know these patterns in as many ways as possible to really help us to expand our playing and break outside of the typical, boxy pentatonic stuff, which is fine, right? There's nothing wrong with that playing. If we add that in with these new concepts, we're going to have a lot more possibilities. Okay, well, we could also move not just diagonally this way, but what about diagonally this way? We could maybe come up to the equivalent pattern that we started at here, an octave higher. Remember we talked about that? Right, how that pattern also exists up there, right? And I start here and I work my way backwards. Now you're going to get some doubled notes here, watch. Sort of every time you switch strings, the note you land on becomes that. So you could do something different. You could even maybe just go backward. But if you get good with that type of an idea, just get creative with it, right? You come up with some pretty cool little licks. I'm almost finger picking a little country chicken picking type of. you can get some really interesting ideas there, and it's just gonna break us out of, like I said, our comfort zone, get us trying new things that we wouldn't have thought of doing. And again, we could start that from any pattern, wherever we are, and move that around. Okay, so those are some pretty interesting concepts we can come up with. So again, to recap, we have our 5 or 6 new patterns horizontally on each string, right? And I gave you those before. If you need to go back and recap, rewind the video, watch again, pause it. You've got all the graphics up on the screen for what those patterns are. Move that all the way up over all the strings. And we talked about how we can just improvise around that. We then talked about taking our little sort of zigzag pattern, omitting some of the notes from our typical pentatonic patterns we're used to. Doing those kind of ideas to almost create little chord shapes within, minor, this should be major. There's going to be all sorts of new shapes maybe we wouldn't have thought of doing before. Right? All sorts of new ways to move around and get comfortable with that. And then we talked about the diagonal movement, right? Which will get us thinking, moving this way. When we combine all of that, we can start to find ourselves moving around the fretboard in a much more interesting manner. Okay, so we see how we can utilize a lot of those ideas to really break outside of just sticking to our patterns, okay? I hope that helps you guys. We're going to take this even further next time. We're going to talk about even more ideas to thinking outside of, you know, the normal box way of playing the pentatonics. They're such useful scales. They sound so amazing, and they can be a very easy thing to utilize to sound musical, you know, very quickly. And the more ways that we can really get these scales embedded into our psyche on a subconscious level, we're going to be able to use them in a much more musical manner and come up with ideas that are going to be very unique, not just the same old recycled blues licks we see everybody play and teach, right? So I'm trying to set up concepts here, not so much, here's a lick, you know, play this lick that's been played a million times. Well, you can go listen to, you know, Eric Clapton records and Led Zeppelin records and B.B. King records and name a million players and go learn their licks, and you're going to have the same thing. I'd rather think of coming up with new concepts to put these scales together into creative ways that we're going to be able to come up with our own style and play with them. Okay? So hopefully that helps some of you guys. Stay tuned. I'm going to be back with a part 3 of this on the pentatonic scales, and then there's a whole lot more in store after that and how we can utilize these at different keys and some of the techniques I'm using maybe and whatnot. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and please like and share and subscribe, and I really appreciate all your support, and leave your comments. I'm happy to answer them, and even, you know, leave your ideas for future videos. I'm always happy to try and get to some of those as well. All right, for now, thanks guys so much. I appreciate your time, and I hope I helped some, and we'll see you next time.